This happened about 10 years ago when I was 17. It was one of those summer nights that felt like they'd never end, filled with the promise of adventure and excitement. My friends and I had decided to play football under the moonlight, deep in the woods near our small, secluded town. Little did we know that this seemingly innocent game would turn into a nightmarish ordeal that still haunts my dreams. The moon hung low in the sky, casting eerie shadows that danced through the dense forest. We gathered around the makeshift football field we had carved out in the clearing, the grass damp with dew. The air was thick with anticipation, our breaths visible in the cold night air. We divided into 2 teams, my friend Mike and I as captains. As the game started, the night seemed to grow darker, and the forest seemed to close in on us. Our shouts echoed through the trees, creating an unsettling chorus that filled the woods. It wasn't long before I noticed something strange, something that sent shivers down my spine. I saw a figure darting between the trees on the outskirts of our playing field, a shadowy presence that moved with unnatural swiftness. I tried to brush it off as a trick of the mind, but a feeling of unease settled in my gut. I glanced at Mike, who had also noticed the strange figure. His face mirrored my concern, and he motioned for me to call a timeout. The other players grumbled, but we needed to investigate. Mike and I ventured into the woods, our flashlight beams cutting through the inky darkness. Leaves rustled, and twigs snapped beneath our sneakers, and the eerie silence of the forest grew more unsettling with every step we took. The woods were alive with hidden sounds and unseen creatures, and our hearts pounded in response. We reached the spot where we had seen the figure, but there was nothing there. No sign of anyone or anything. Mike looked at me, his brow furrowed in confusion. Just as we were about to head back, a low guttural growl pierced the silence, causing both of us to freeze in our tracks. We swung our flashlights in the direction of the sound, and our beams landed on a horrifying sight. A creature, unlike anything I had ever seen, stood before us. It was tall and emaciated, with long, spindly limbs and eyes that seemed to glow with malevolence. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and it seemed to flicker and shift in the dim light. Without warning, the creature lunged at us, its unnaturally long fingers reaching out like claws. Mike and I stumbled backward, terror gripping our hearts. Adrenaline surged through our veins as we turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, branches tearing at our clothes and skin. The creature pursued us, its sinister growls echoing through the woods. We burst back into the clearing, gasping for breath, and yelled at our friends to run. Panic spread like wildfire as they saw the terror in our eyes. Without hesitation, we abandoned the football game and sprinted through the woods, the creature's chilling presence close behind. The forest seemed to stretch on endlessly, the path before us a blur of darkness and fear. Our only hope was to reach the safety of our town, but the creature showed no signs of tiring. It pursued us relentlessly, always just a step behind, its malevolent growls growing louder with each passing moment. As we finally reached the outskirts of town, the creature abruptly stopped, retreating back into the shadows of the woods. We collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath, our bodies trembling with fear and exhaustion. We never spoke of that night again, but the memory of the creature in the woods still haunts me to this day, a chilling reminder that some horrors are best left in the shadows. When I was 20, my friends and I had a tradition we called nightmare football. It was a dark and eerie twist on our usual football games, played under the moon's eerie glow. We usually met at the abandoned football field on the outskirts of town, far from prying eyes, making it the perfect spot for our sinister pastime. One fateful night, the air was charged with an unsettling energy, and the moon hung low in the sky, casting eerie shadows across the field. It was as if the night itself conspired with the impending horror that awaited us. My friends, Jake, Sarah, Mark, and I gathered at the field, armed with flashlights and a worn-out football. The game began like any other. The darkness added an element of thrill, and the adrenaline pumped through our veins as we chased the ball, our flashlights darting wildly through the night. Laughter echoed in the quiet darkness as we tackled each other, trying to gain control of the ball. As the game progressed, an unsettling unease settled upon us. Strange rustling sounds emanated from the surrounding woods, and our flashlights occasionally caught glimpses of moving shadows in the periphery. We dismissed these disturbances as mere tricks of our imagination, a product of the creepy atmosphere we had intentionally created. But as time passed, the shadows grew bolder, seemingly creeping closer with every flicker of our flashlights. Uneasiness turned into paranoia, and our laughter turned into nervous glances. Sarah was the first to suggest we call it a night and head home. Reluctantly, we agreed and began to pack up our gear. Just as we were about to leave, Mark's flashlight illuminated something that sent chills down our spines, a dark figure standing at the edge of the field, partially hidden by the trees. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural, otherworldly light. Fear paralyzed us as the figure started to move toward us, step by slow and deliberate step. Panic surged through our veins as we fumbled to turn on our flashlights, which had suddenly gone dim. The night seemed to conspire against us, plunging us into a suffocating darkness. The figure drew closer, and a frigid breeze whispered through the trees, carrying with it an eerie whisper, almost like a mournful lament. We huddled together, our hearts pounding, our breaths shallow. Our minds raced with 1,000 terrifying thoughts. Suddenly, the figure was upon us, emerging from the shadows. It was a grotesque, spectral entity with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce our souls. Its presence was suffocating, and a putrid stench filled the air. Without warning, it reached out, its ghastly skeletal hand touching Mark's shoulder. Mark let out a blood-curdling scream, and we watched in horror as his body began to wither and age before our eyes. His skin wrinkled, his hair turned gray, and he gasped for breath as life was drained from him. In a frenzy of terror, we managed to flee, leaving Mark behind. We raced through the dark woods, our hearts pounding in our chests, our minds consumed by the horrors we had witnessed. We didn't stop until we reached the safety of the town, where we finally caught our breath and realized that Mark was gone, lost to the malevolent force that had haunted our game that night. To this day, the memory of that night haunts us, a constant reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the most innocent of pastimes. We never played nightmare football again, and we live with the guilt of leaving our friend behind to face the horrors of that night alone. But one thing is certain: we will never forget the sinister figure that emerged from the shadows and the evil that lurked in the darkness of that cursed football field. My friends and I get together every Saturday to play football at night. It had become a weekly tradition for us, a way to escape the monotony of our daily lives and relive the glory days of our youth. We'd gather at the abandoned football field on the outskirts of town, where the darkness seemed to swallow everything, except the glow of the moon and the distant hum of the city. On this particular Saturday, a thick fog rolled in, blanketing the field in an eerie shroud. It clung to the grass like ghostly fingers, making the field almost unrecognizable. The air was heavy with the promise of rain, and a chill ran down my spine as I stepped onto the field. "Come on, guys, don't be such wimps," Mike, our resident daredevil, scoffed as he tossed me the football. "A little fog won't hurt us." The rest of the group nodded in agreement, and we began our game, the fog swirling around us like specters, watching our every move. At first, the game was like any other, filled with laughter and friendly competition. But as the minutes ticked by, the fog seemed to grow denser, and an unsettling feeling settled over us. That's when we heard it, a faint whispering, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. We paused, glancing at each other with furrowed brows. "Did you guys hear that?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. Mike, ever the fearless one, brushed it off. "Probably just the wind, Em. Keep playing." So, we did, though the unease lingered. The fog thickened, obscuring our vision even more, and the field felt strangely vast, as though it stretched on forever. We played on, the football becoming a phantom in the mist, and our footsteps muffled by the damp grass. Then, it happened again, a faint, eerie whisper, like a secret carried on the breeze. This time, there was no denying it. The voices were real. "Who's there?" Mark called out, his voice quivering. No one answered. The fog closed in around us, and a sense of foreboding settled over the group like a dark cloud. We decided to call it a night and began to make our way toward the field's edge, where the faint glow of streetlights beckoned. But the fog seemed to have other plans. It thickened around us, obscuring our surroundings until we couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Panic set in as we stumbled through the mist, disoriented and frightened. That's when we heard the footsteps, soft, deliberate, and seemingly coming from all directions. The whispers grew louder, now forming words, but they were distorted and unintelligible. "Who's out there?" Mike shouted, his bravado replaced with fear. Then, emerging from the fog, we saw them, shadowy figures, their forms shifting and indistinct. They moved toward us with an eerie grace, their eyes glowing like embers in the darkness. We ran, our hearts pounding, but the figures pursued us relentlessly. The fog seemed to conspire with them, twisting and contorting to block our path and drive us deeper into the field. Panic turned to terror as we realized there was no way out. The figures closed in, their whispers growing louder and more sinister. We huddled together, praying for daylight, for salvation from whatever malevolent force had descended upon us. Just when it seemed all hope was lost, the fog began to recede, slowly lifting like a curtain being drawn. The figures retreated with it, their glowing eyes fading into the mist. We stumbled out of the field, gasping for breath and covered in cold sweat. We never played football at that field again, and the memory of that night haunted us for years. We never discovered the origin of those eerie whispers or the shadowy figures that pursued us. It remains a mystery, a tale we only dared to share around campfires, as a cautionary tale of the horrors that can lurk in the darkness, waiting for the perfect moment to strike.